Hey, what's going on guys, Ace here, and today we are going to try something different, where I will be reacting to your builds of the perfect midfielder in Blue Lock. And of course, it goes without saying, shout out to everyone who commented, both on the post and on the video. However, before we begin, I'd like to address something. You see, in my post, I did not make a distinction between an offensive and a defensive midfielder, because honestly that was only apparent to me when I started making my list, and so this one is on me guys. However, with that out of the way, let's dig in. Starting up straight with the man, the legend, the guy who started this trend, Ahmed Omran. He says that he feels good to be the one who started this trend, and rightfully so my friend, you should feel good. In any case, his list goes as follows. First, for physicality he went with Hiyori, and for mentality with Don Lorenzo, which I totally don't agree with for both. Hiyori's physicality is nothing impressive, he's not strong at all. We clearly saw that he is around Isagi's level of physicality, and honestly that's not a lot by any means. As for mentality he went with Lorenzo, which I don't know how I feel about it. Sure, Lorenzo is a very friendly player and helps to raise the team's morale, however everything else about his mentality isn't that great. First of all, he's way too playful. Second, he has no ego, and third, he never shown that he is that smart. And so, I don't know how I feel about this. I don't agree with these 2 points completely. And carrying on with the trend, as I don't really agree with ego as well, because we've yet to see Charles show any ego. He doesn't seem to be an egoist at all, much like Lorenzo. And so for these 3 points, I don't know what to tell you man. I totally don't agree with any of them. For vision he chose Hiyori, which I would understand, however I would say Charles is better, even if you say that Hiyori and Charles' metavision are on the same level, which I don't agree with by the way. I think Charles' metavision is a bit better. On top of that, Charles has the sniper eyes, which are like the predator eyes for midfielders, and so he trumps Hiyori completely. It's not like Hiyori is not a great option here, it's just that Charles is the best, plain and simple. For field IQ he gave it to Rin, which again I would understand, but I would suggest that Sai is better. Not because Sai is better as a player, but because Sai is better as a midfielder, and so yeah, I think Rin's field IQ would fit, but I think Sai is a bit better because we're talking about midfielders here. For passing he went with Hiyori, which I totally understand it. As for versatility he went with Ryo. Again, I totally understand it. And FYI, in my post, I actually meant by versatility passing versatility, because I think the player's whole versatility fits in the playing style and not as a separate point. But again, much like the first point, this is on me, as if we want to talk about versatility in general, I think Ryo is the most versatile player, and so I agree. For the 3 abilities, he chose Hiyori's dribbling, Karasu's ball keeping ability, and Nessa's ankle control. So here's the thing, all of these 3 points are actually great, however they really do not fit with each other. I don't think you can dribble like Hiyori and at the same time have Nessa's ankle control, and so I don't know about this. Why did you choose 3 points that are interchangeable? As I said, I agree with the points, but I don't agree with all of them being there. I think if you chose any of them, just one is enough, and then gave the player other things like adaptability or the chameleon style or whatever. But finally, for the playing style he says Hiyori, which I would agree with. Hiyori is insane. Moving on to Ramfuji's comment, and he says, for physicality he would like to go with Sai because of his versatility. And while I agree with this, I think Ryo is better. Sure, Rin and Sai are very versatile and very well rounded, but I think Ryo is better than the Itoshi brothers in this regard, especially because of the fact that he can copy both of them. Next, for mentality he went with either Sai or Hiyori, which I totally agree with. I tell you, for the offensive midfielder, it's gotta be one of these two. For ego he went with Sai, and for vision with Charles, and I totally agree with this. For field IQ he went with Hiyori, and again while I agree, I think Sai is a bit better. For passing he went with Charles, same as me, and so I agree. And for versatility and seriousness he went with Sai again, which I totally agree with. And for the 3 abilities he went with Sai's dribbling, Charles' passing, and Hiyori's metavision. Now Sai's dribbling I agree with, but here's the thing with the next 2 points. You already went with Charles for both passing and vision, and so I'm wondering why would you reselect him here? You kinda are repeating yourself. As I said in the previous comment, I would have preferred if you went with another ability. Yeah, I don't know. And finally for the playing style he went with Sai, which I totally agree with. Next is Celeste Skies, and she says, For physicality she went with Raichi, and for mentality she chose Karasu, which honestly are such great picks. I think she's leaning towards a defensive midfielder. However, for ego she went with Hiyori, as well as for vision she went with Hiyori again, and so I think it's not for a defensive midfielder, but rather she's trying to make a balanced player, which I totally respect. For field IQ she went with Karasu, which I definitely agree with. Karasu's reading ability is very underrated. For passing she chose Hiyori. And I think she's the first one to understand what I meant by versatility, as she chose Charles. As I said in my list, Charles has the best passing versatility. And for seriousness she chose Karasu, which I agree with again. Now I'm noticing that you did not choose Sai at all, which makes me think, did you only choose from Blue Lock? Because I would understand that. But in any case, for the 3 abilities, she went with Raichi's Dueling, Isegi's Adaptability, and Charles' Passing Eyes. Now, Raichi's Dueling and Isegi's Adaptability are perfect. However, for the Passing Eyes, wouldn't you just choose Charles for Vision and give this point to something else? And finally, for the playing style, she chose Karasu, and she says that he is an underrated midfielder, which again, I totally agree with. I'm not going to lie, I really love your list. It's very interesting, especially with the fusion between the defensive and offensive midfielder. However, let's move to the next comment, which is by Zachary99. He says that he doesn't know anything about soccer and just likes Blue Lock, and so this person might be really bad. Man, me too. I don't really watch football, especially after Ronaldo and Messi left La Liga. However, liking Blue Lock will be enough, because this list is based on Blue Lock and not real life football. So for physicality he went with Sai. Again, an amazing choice. I just think Rio is a bit better, but I agree with it. Mentality and ego he went with Hiyori, much like me. For vision he chose Aiku, which I would assume for metavision. Now I'm one of those who believe that Aiku's metavision is on Isegi, Charles and Kaiser post-awakening level, and so I kinda understand it. However, I would still choose Charles, just because he has the secondary eyes. For field IQ he went with Isegi. Even though he's a striker, I think his field readability is perfect, so I agree. For passing he went with Charles, and for versatility he went with Karasu. For seriousness he went with Ren, and here I gotta say, after the last few chapters, I don't think Ren fits here at all. If anything, Angry Noah is a perfect example of someone not being serious. As for the abilities he chose, he went with 2, Corona's Dribbling and Isegi's Metavision. Now, you chose Aiko for Vision. I don't think Isegi fits here. I think if you chose his Adaptability, that would have been better. As for Corona's Speed Dribbling, I agree with it, especially because you have the 3rd point vacant, which you could choose another dribbling, so the player should be fast at it. And finally, for the playing style, he chose Sai, which I agree with. Next is a comment by a guy with the name User, and he says, give everything to my boy Sai. Now I agree with almost everything when it comes to Sai, but there is one player that excels better than Sai in a certain regard, and that player is actually Charles with his vision. Sure, you could say Rio is better than Sai when it comes to physicality, but the difference isn't that big, and so Sai fits. However, for vision, I think Charles having the sniper eyes really gives him an insane edge as a midfielder, and so that's my only contention with this point. So moving on to Dion's comment, he says physicality Rio, I agree with that, mentality Karasu, I agree again, ego and vision he chose Charles. While I agree with vision, I think Charles has the best vision for a midfielder, I totally disagree with choosing him for ego. The guy isn't really an egoist if you think about it. He's kinda like Lorenzo, he's not that intense, he's a laid back funny dude. But anyways, for field IQ he went with Rio. And here, actually I like this, because I think Rio has one of the best field IQs ever. However, his fixation on Nagi is really hurting him. And so, because we don't have that here, I think this fits perfectly. Next for passing, he went with either Charles or Ness, and he says that they have the highest stats in the NEL. And honestly, I couldn't agree more. For versatility, he went with Rio, and I agree with that, and for seriousness, Karasu, which is a great choice. For the 3 abilities, he went with Rio's copy, Karasu's ball keeping, and Ness's dribbling. And here, I actually agree with all of them. Sure, the ball keeping and Ness's dribbling might conflict with each other because they kinda do the same, and I would have wished if you changed one of them to a different weapon. However, I still think this works nonetheless. And finally, for the playing style, he chose Karasu, and he says because he's analytical. And here, I honestly could not agree more. I think Sai is better, but if we give Karasu better passing and better vision, I think he can rival him no problem. Next is Go Tomorrow, and he says, for the playing style is Sai. I agree with that. For physicality is Rio, same as me. For mentality is Lorenzo, which again I don't agree with at all. For ego is Hiyori, sure I agree with that. For vision Hiyori again, and I would agree Charles is better, but come on. For field IQ, it's either Rin or Sai. Yes, I agree with that completely. Then for passing, versatility and seriousness, he chose Sai. And honestly, I agree with all of them. I think Charles has shown more feats when it comes to passing, but overall Sai is insane as well. For the 3 abilities, he chose Ryo's copy, Rin's dribbling, and Tokimitsu's endurance. Now this is actually rather smart, because a midfielder would be running all over the place, and so choosing Tokimitsu's endurance is really great. However, why not Raichi's, right? I think when it comes to stamina, Raichi is better, but that's not really important here. Overall, I really love this build, with the exception of Lorenzo of course. But moving on to that man Eon's comment. He chose for physicality Kiora, and I really do not agree with this. We've seen him multiple times lose physically to Karasu, and so if anything you should have at least chose Karasu. For mentality and he lumped it with seriousness, he chose Isigi. Now sure, Isigi is smart and has a great mentality, however I think it fits more for a striker, because he's always wanting to achieve his own goal, while a midfielder not necessarily, right? And so here while I agree for seriousness, if you just swap Isigi with his best friend Hiyori, I would agree totally. Next for ego he chose Hiyori for being the producer for goals, which I totally agree with, and for vision he chose Charles, and I mean there isn't really a better choice. For field IQ he went with Ryo, again Ryo is insane so I agree, and for the playing style in general he went with Hiyori, which I would really agree with again. For the 3 abilities he chose Hiyori's cool-headed vision, Bachira's passing, and Rin's off-the-ball movements. Okay, so I understand Hiyori's cool-headed vision, especially with Charles' sniper eyes. However, Bachira's passing? Really? I mean, we've got so many players that are better than him when it comes to passing. I think even Kiora is better than him. Then Rin's off-the-ball movements, which I agree with. I think Isigi and Kazu's off-the-ball movements are a bit better, but I don't know, I think Rin is great overall, and so I agree with it. Next is Draco Wilderness, and he says, for physicality he went with either Chigiri or Zantetsu for their speed, which while I see the appeal, I think going for versatility is better. Next for mentality and ego he chose Hiyori, which I totally agree with, and for vision he chose Charles, Hiyori or Aiku. Yeah, I don't know, I think Charles trumps them both, so yeah. For field IQ he chose Isigi, which I agree with, and then for passing, which he assumed to replace in shooting, yeah that's it, he went with Sai. Okay, great, I think Sai's passes are insane. And for seriousness again he went with Sai as well, which I agree with. Then for the playing style in general he went with either Sai or Hiyori. And again I agree with that totally. And finally for versatility he went with Ryo, which is a great choice. For the 3 abilities he went with understanding egocentrism, which I totally agree with. Passive dribbling kinda like Sai's, which is amazing, and then adaptability. Funny enough, these are my 3 abilities, and so props to you man. However, let's move on to the next comment, which is by 8. He says for physicality he's choosing Raichi, and he says that he has been cooking the entire PXG match, and I honestly really agree with this. I don't think Raichi's versatility is that high, however him holding his own against Snuffy and lowering his options is a great feat, and so I kinda agree with that. I mean if you get Snuffy or Noah telling you that you have a great core, that's a really good feat. Next his vision, and he says either Hiyori or Charles, and here I'm telling you, it's Charles, it's not either, it's Charles. For mentality he went with Karasu, which I agree with, and for ego he went with Charles, and he says that the boy seems hungry for success at a really young age. When was he hungry for success? He was only hungry to thwart Isigi's plans. I don't see him as an egoist at all, and so I don't agree with this one. For field IQ he went with Karasu, and I totally agree. And here's the curveball here. For seriousness he went with Lorenzo, one of the funniest guys. However, he went further and explained, although he likes to play around, but he never disrespects any opponent. That's really interesting. I think he saw it from a different perspective, and if we look at it from this perspective, I agree. Lorenzo, while being playful, is a very respectable player. And so yeah, if you want to see it from this point, yeah, sure. For passing he went with Charles, which I think is a great choice. Then for the 3 abilities, he went with Nagi's trapping, Isigi's adaptability, and Otoya's sneaking. Hold on, so I agree with Isigi's adaptability, but what would Nagi's trapping do? You know, the midfielder is trying to throw the ball, not trying to catch it. And so I totally don't agree with this one. Otoya sneaking could be an interesting thing actually, because if you have a great off-the-ball movement, with Otoya sneaking you get to be deadly. As for the playstyle in general, he went with Sai, which I agree with. The next comment is by Skies Indigo, and he says, for physicality he went with Kiora. Sure he's agile and all, but I don't see his physicality great for midfielders. For mentality he went with Iseki, which I kinda agree with, but as I said he's leaning towards a striker more. As for ego he went with Sai, which is fine. Then for vision he chose Charles, and for field IQ Iseki, which I agree with both 100%. For passing he chose Sai, and for versatility as well he chose Sai. And here I would say Charles is better when it comes to passing, but I would give it to Sai no problem. And finally for seriousness he chose Iseki, and yeah, that fits perfectly. For the 3 abilities he went with Sai's dribbling, Charles passing, and Nagi's trapping. So I already explained Nagi's trapping, and Charles passing we already chose Sai, and why would we choose a point twice? And then Sai's dribbling, which I agree with. For the playing style in general he went with Hiyori, which is a great choice here, and so let's just move on to the next comment, which is by Warrior of Salvation. He says, for physicality he's going with Rin, which is perfect because Rin is very versatile. For mentality he went with Sai, which I agree with, and for ego he went with Hiyori. Then for vision he chose Iseki. And here again I'm calling it you should choose Charles. For versatility he went with Ryo, which is a great choice, and then for seriousness obviously Sai, which again fits perfectly. As for passing he went with Hiyori. When it comes to the playing style he gave a generalization but he didn't choose a player, and so I don't know what to say for this. Then for the 3 abilities he chose egocentrism, adaptability, and Bachira's monster dribbling. I totally agree with each and every point here. Next is a comment by Darkfire, and he says Hiyori, Bachira, Charles, Cavalier, and Ryo. Now this is obviously a generalization, but I think these are very solid choices, except for Bachira, which I would suggest to be changed with Sai. Next is Cup Noodles, and she says Kiora for physicality, which is the 3rd time I'm seeing this. I don't know what to tell you guys. Sure he's agile and quick, but I don't know, he has been having his ass handed to him by Karaso in the midfield, and so I really do not like this choice. For mentality she went with Iseki, which as I said before I agree with. For ego Sai, and for vision Hiyori, which both are insane. I think for vision you should choose Charles always, but Hiyori is a solid choice nonetheless. For field IQ she chose Iseki, which is perfect, and then for passing she chose either Sai or Ness, which again is perfect. For versatility, seriousness, and for the playing style in general she went with Sai again, and there I agree with all of them. Then for the abilities, she chose Sai's dribbling and Charles's passing. Here I'm just thinking, why wouldn't you just choose Charles for the point of passing and then call it a day? As for Sai's dribbling I agree with that totally, and she didn't have the 3rd skill. But anyways, moving on to Lemur's comment, and he says, physicality he's giving it to Kiora again. I really do not see it. Like he has been getting his ass handed to him by Karasu in the midfield, especially when it comes to physicality, and so I don't see why people are choosing Kiora. For mentality he went with Ego Jinpachi, and he says that his goal is to create the best striker. And while I see the logic, I think Ego is considered a pro, so I don't know what to tell you. For Ego, which is, the trait, he chose Hiyori, which I agree with. For vision he chose Charles, then for field IQ he went with Sai, passing he went with Sai, versatility he went with Sai, seriousness he went with Sai. And get this, for the playing style he chose Sai. And guess what? I agree with all of these choices. Then for the 3 abilities, he went with Iseki's off-the-ball movement, Nagi's ball control and trapping, and then Sai's technicality. While I would agree with Sai's technicality and Iseki's off-the-ball movement. As I said, Nagi's ball control is great for a striker, not so much for a midfielder. However, with that, let's move on to the next comment, which is by Truly. He chose Karaso for physicality, which, I don't know, he's good, but I think Sai and Ryo are better. Then for mentality, ego, and vision, he went with Sai, which I would agree with all of them except vision, which should always go for Charles. Then for the playing style in general, he went with Karasu, which again is a very solid choice. As for the weapons, he went with Ryo's chameleon style, metavision, and off-the-ball movements. I mean, we are sure Sai has metavision, so I don't know why would you choose it here. As for the 2 other abilities, I think they are perfect. And finally, he says that he hopes we like the character he made. And to that I would say yes, we love it. Except for some minor points, I think overall it's a great character. But alright, next is Loophole YT, and he says, I wanted to challenge myself, so I only used each player once, along with only using mids. And that's definitely interesting. I'm wondering, after we do the defenders video, I might do the overall player, where I would choose only one weapon from each Blue Lock character. And I think that's definitely interesting and a really good challenge, and so actually thank you for the idea. But in any case, he says, for physicality I'm going with Tokimitsu, a strong muscle build with underrated speed. Which, okay, I get it. I mean, Tokimitsu is well-rounded too, but I wouldn't say he is underrated in any regards. I think he's shooting himself in the foot with his mentality, but here his insane physicality works. Next for mentality he went with Ness, and he says that he knows it's silly, but his mentality has matured in the PXG match. And to that I say, no it didn't. His fixation on Kaiser will forever be a bad thing, and definitely hurts his mentality points, and so I totally don't agree with this one. And for ego he went with Sendo, despite playing the second fiddle to Baro. Okay, I totally don't agree with this one. I don't think Sendo is the right type of an egoist. I think all he's doing is trying not to be left out, and that's definitely not going to get him far. You have to remember in the U20 game, he clashed with Saiyan Shido specifically because of his low hunger, and so I really do not agree with this one. For Vision he went with Nico, and I think Nico plays as a defender now. But then again, in the Ubers he actually played as a defensive midfielder, and so I give you that. And since I'm assuming you gave Charles, Sai and Hiyori other weapons, I think Nico's vision fits here perfectly. For field IQ he said Isigi, and it should be obvious. However, after the Ubers game Isigi became a striker, man. He's no longer a forward midfielder. Sure, he could play it and he could still score, but if you remember right now, he took Kaiser's place as the main striker of the team, and so I don't know about keeping up to your rules. But in any case, for passing he went with Charles, and I totally agree. For versatility he went with Sai, and another great choice. And for seriousness he went with Karasu, which I totally agree with. For playstyle in general he went with Ryo, and here I actually agree with it. I think Ryo without his fixation on Nagi is insane, and besides he kinda copies both Rin and Sai, so he has that going for him. Then for the three weapons, he went with Rachi's stamina, Zantetsu's acceleration, and Nanas's ambidexteriness. Okay, so why would you choose Raichi's stamina? I think if the player has Tokimitsu's physique, he already has stamina. I would have preferred if you actually chose another weapon from another player. Then for Zantetsu's acceleration, I actually see it being put in use for him to go up and down the field quickly, and so I agree with it. For Nanas's ambidexteriness, it kinda opens him to more options, and so I agree with it, especially with Charles' passes. However, man, this list is lacking something big. How could you forget Hiyori? You forgot one of the best midfielders, like he is top 3 midfielder. Why would you go with Sendo and leave Hiyori? I feel the rules were great, but you kinda lost your way down the list. For the very least, I think you should change Sendo or Ness for Hiyori. But in any case, let's move on to the next comment, which is by Baro3185. For physicality he went with Karasu, and I kinda agree with it. I think there are better players, but Karasu is really good as well. For mentality he went with Sai, and for ego as well he went with Sai, and I agree for both. And then man, this guy is amazing. For vision, field IQ, passing, and versatility he went with Charles. And guess what guys, I agree with all of them. So for passing versatility and passing trajectory, and for vision I think Charles is the best. For field IQ I think Sai might be better, but I think Charles is great as well. Then for seriousness he chose Baro, which I agree with completely. Maybe not Baro before the NEL, but current Baro is very serious, and so I agree with it. For the sets of 3 abilities he went with Metavision, one-on-one dueling, and adaptability. So I agree with adaptability, and I would assume one-on-one dueling you were talking about Raichi's dueling or something, so I agree with it as well. But for Metavision we already went with that with Charles, and so I think you should have went with something else. And finally for the playing style he went with Sai, which I agree with it completely. Next is a comment by someone named Skilled Clips. That's a funny name. For physicality he went with Hiyori, and I don't agree with that completely, man. For mentality he has Sai, which I agree with it. Then for ego he went with Hiyori again, however this time I agree with it. For vision we have Charles, and for field IQ we have Isigi, and for passing we have Sai, and I totally agree with all of these. Then for versatility he went with Ryo, which is a great choice. For seriousness Sai, again another great choice. And then we have the 3 abilities. He went with egocentrism, adaptability, and Ryo's copy style. And so you kinda got the right idea with egocentrism and adaptability. However, I don't know, I feel like adaptability and the chameleon style are kinda similar, and so they're kinda interchangeable, and thus I think you should have chosen a dribbling ability. Then for the playing style he went with Hiyori again, which I agree with it completely. Overall I really love this list, if it wasn't for the first point being physicality. I mean Hiyori is kinda like Isigi and Bachira, physicality isn't really his thing. But moving on, as we have someone with a Chinese name and he says, For physicality he went with Kunigami, and I agree with it, he's great. For mentality he went with Isagi, again, very smart dude. Then for ego he went with Sai, totally agree. For vision he went with Isagi. I would say Charles is better, but I get why Isagi, his metavision is OP. For field IQ Isagi, and I wouldn't say a thing about it. Then for seriousness, versatility and passing he gave everything to Sai, which I agree with it almost completely. I think Charles is better at passing, but Sai is great overall. Then for the 3 abilities, he went with adaptability, Sai's dribbling and egocentrism. Just perfect. And finally for the playing style in general he went with Sai, and I think this list is absolutely perfect. I love it. Sure, I think you should have included Charles here and there, but overall it's great and this player is really OP. And honestly the Charles thing is just nitpicking at this point, so let's just move on to the next comment, which is by OK25000. And here he says he's talking about a hybrid, 50% a midfielder and a 50% number 10 midfielder. I really do not watch football that much for me to know what the difference is, but let's trust the comment. And he says that he has a perfectly balanced body, and I agree with that. However, Ryo is better, but Ren is great still. Then for mentality he went with Karasu, and I totally agree. For ego he chose Charles, and I totally disagree. I think Charles has shown us no ego as of yet. For field IQ he went with Isagi, and that's great. For versatility Sai, and he says what cannot he do, and I totally agree. Then for seriousness he went with Isagi again, which I agree with. Then for the 3 abilities he went with Charles' passes, Bachira's dribbling and Isagi's vision. And to that I'm asking, where is the vision and passing points? I think if you gave Isagi's vision and Charles passes to their respective points, and then chose different abilities, it would have been perfect. As for the playing style in general, he says 50-50, but with 2 defensive midfielders behind. I think I don't know real life football enough for me to understand totally what you are doing. I think you missed on vision and passing as separate points, but overall I like it. Next we have a comment by Hussein Abdullah, and he says, for physicality he went with Ryo, and then for versatility he went with Sai, and I agree with both. For mentality he went with Sai again, and again I agree with it. For field IQ and vision he went with Isagi, and then he actually extends and says egocentrism just made his metavision better than the rest, and that, my friend, is actually so true. However, I think for a midfielder Charles' vision is far better than Isagi, just for the simple fact of the sniper eyes. And also I think we cannot include egocentrism here because it's a separate weapon. Then he added a point of his own, which is dribbling, and gave it to Sai, which if I have chosen this I would agree with it. Then the passing point he gave it to Sai, which I would agree with even though Charles is a bit better. For the 3 abilities he went with Sai's counter dribbling, which I think he is talking about his passive dribbling. Then Isagi's adaptability and vision, Charles' passing ability and Kaza's off the ball movements. I mean, you chose more than 3 abilities here, which is not really good. Overall I think your list is a bit all over the place. However, I kinda like some things you chose here, especially like noticing that Isagi's vision is great because of his egocentrism, which makes me beg the question, why didn't you just choose egocentrism as a weapon? But regardless, let's move on to the next comment, which is by Christian, and he says, for physicality he went with Ryo, for mentality he went with Hiyori, and for ego he went with Sai, and I agree with all of 3. Vision he gave it to Charles, and I mean he's the best option. Field IQ he went with Hiyori, and I agree with it. Then for passing he went with Charles again. As for versatility he went with Sai, and I agree with both choices. For the 3 abilities he went with passive dribbling, which is like Sai's, and he says that it is better than active, which I agree with. I mean, I don't even agree with it. The writer clearly said it, so you are on point. Then he went with Ryo's chameleon style, and he's calling it hacks, and I totally agree. I think if Ryo just had a better mentality and ego he would have been insane. And for the final point he went with adaptability, which I wouldn't agree with because we have Ryo's chameleon style. I think you should guys choose one or the other because they kinda serve the same purpose. Then he says that he's assuming that the character already has metavision. I mean, you chose Charles for vision, so he obviously has it. As for the general playing style, he went with Sai, and I agree with it. Again, another perfect list. I think if you just chose another weapon instead of adaptability, it would have been honestly just perfect. However, let's just move on to the next comment by King Hydra. For physicality he went with Ryo, and for mentality Karasu, and I agree with both. Then for ego he went with Ren, and here I kinda have a contagion point. Noah called Ren the worst type of egoist, which means his ego is kinda bad. I mean, I get it, it's OP, but I don't think it's good for the long run, especially after we've seen him miss a very obvious scoring chance. And so I really do not agree with choosing Ren here. For vision, he went with Charles, and field IQ with Hiyori, and I agree with both again. Then passing, he went with Charles, and versatility Karasu, and I agree with both again. For seriousness, he went with Itoshi Sai, a very solid choice. For the 3 abilities, he went with Sai's dribbling, Karasu's ball keeping ability, and Ryo's chameleon style, and I agree with all of them. However, I think if the player has a passive dribbling like Sai's, he kinda does not need Karasu's ball keeping ability. And finally, he went with Charles for the playing style, which again I agree with it. Overall, I think this list is amazing, except for the ego point. I think Noah calling Rain the worst type of egoist is just really hurting him. But that's all for this list. Let's move on to the next comment, which is by Meta142. For physicality he went with Ryo, which I totally agree with. Then for mentality he chose Hiyori, and for ego he chose Isigi, and I agree with both. Vision he gave it to Charles, which is a great choice, and Field IQ he gave it to Karasu, which is again a very solid choice. Passing he gave it to Sai, and versatility he gave it to Hiyori. And while I agree with the Sai point, I don't agree with the Hiyori one. I don't think he has shown any versatility feats. I think you should have given this to Arno, maybe Charles, Sai, or even Ryo. But in any case, for seriousness he chose Sai, which is a great choice. Then for the 3 weapons, adaptability, egocentrism, and Nagi's ball control. And so while I agree with adaptability and egocentrism, why would you choose Nagi's ball control from a midfielder? As I said, he is forwarding the ball, not controlling or trapping it. But in any case, for the playstyle he went with Sai. And so I overall agree with this one except for the Nagi point, and somewhat don't agree with Hiyori's versatility point. But in any case, the next comment is by Max Moon. Physicality he went with Shido, and he says he's fast enough, muscle mass, very flexible and athletic. Okay, I kinda see it, but I think we have better options like, I don't know, the guy who bullied him in Kunigami, or even the guy who stopped Kunigami in Zantetsu. Then, passing he gave it to Sai, ego he gave it to Hiyori, and vision gave it to Charles, which I agree with all of them. Field IQ for Isigi, and seriousness for Baru, which I agree with both. Then the sets of 3 abilities, Sai's dribbling, egocentrism, and adaptability, which I agree with all of them. And so with the exception of Shido's physicality, I think you have a perfect list. So let's just move on. Strange the editor says, playing style he didn't really choose, he just described a person, but he didn't give any name, so I'm going to ignore it actually. For physicality he went with Takemitsu, for ego Bachira, and for field IQ and awareness he went with Ryo. Then for the 3 weapons he went with power, strength, and 1v1 skills. I think you missed the point of the list. You didn't really cover most of the points, and the weapons you chose things that could be attributed in physicality. And so I don't know how to rate this one. So let's just move on to the next comment, which is by Gilad or Gilad. Sorry for butchering your name, man. For physicality he went with Ryo, for mentality Sai, and for ego Sai again, which I agree with all 3. Vision he gave it to Kaiser, both Metavision and Predator eyes, and for that I would say why not Charles, both Metavision and the Sniper eyes. For field IQ he went with Isigi, which I agree with. Then for passing he went with Corona, for his short distant passes. Okay, I kinda like it. It's a very unique thing. I don't agree with the choice though. I kinda like where you were going, but I wouldn't give it to Corona. I think he already does a better job at small passes than Corona. But in any case, for versatility he went with Isigi. And while I agree, I think we have a bit more versatile players than Isigi, but overall, it's a solid choice. And then seriousness he gave it to Isigi again, which I agree with. For the 3 weapons he went with Bachira's dribbling, Isigi's off the ball movement, Sai control over spin and distance. Okay, I get the Isigi and Bachira points, but I really do not get Sai's control over spin and distance. But anyways, the playing style he went with, weirdly enough, Otoya. He says that he is amazing at targeting open spaces, and to that I would say, hello, have you seen Metavision users? They excel at just doing that, and so I would not give it to Otoya unfortunately. But that's all for the list. Let's move on to the next one, which is by Patinho. Again, sorry for butchering your names, guys. For physicality he went with Raichi, which I agree with, and then for mentality he went with Hiyori. Again, a very solid choice. For ego he chose Sai, and for vision Charles, and I agree with both. Then for field IQ he went with Sai again, and for passing he went with Charles again, and so I agree with both again. For versatility he went with Ryo, and then for seriousness he went with Sai, and again I agree with both. Then for the 3 abilities, Bachira's dribbling, Nagi's trapping, and Aiko's analytical capacity. Okay, so I agree with Bachira's dribbling and Aiko's analytical capacity, but again I don't agree with Nagi's trapping. Also he says that Sai has a better dribbling than Bachira, which I don't agree with. We really do not know where Sai falls when it comes to dribbling. I mean, I at least think he is better than Lorenzo and Chigiri. However, both have 93, and Bachira has 95, and this is in the first game. we don't know how much he improved in the last 3 games, and so I really do not believe that Sai is better than Bachara. I think Bachara is the best dribbler in the U20 category hands down, and so yeah, I don't agree. I think Bachara is better. Then for the playing style in general, he went with Rio, which I totally agree with. The next comment is by Kappa, and he says he's aiming to create an attacking midfielder, not a holding midfielder. And so again, this is on me. I should have specified there should be 2 lists, but in any case, let's move on. For physicality, he went with Sai, and I agree with it. Then for mentality, he chose Isigi, which I agree with it again. For ego, he went with Sai, and for vision, he went with Isigi. And again, I agree with both. I just think for vision, he should have went with Charles, but Isigi is an insane choice as well. Then for field IQ, he went with Isigi or Sai, which I agree with completely. And passing, he went with Sai. Then versatility, he went with Rio, which I agree with. As for seriousness, he went with Sai, which again I agree with completely. For the set of 3 abilities, he went with Sai's dribbling, Sai's kicking accuracy, and Isigi's adaptability. And honestly, I agree with Sai's dribbling and Isigi's adaptability. However, hear me out. If you actually chose Charles' vision, you could have ignored the second point, which is Sai's kicking accuracy, because the sniper eyes allow Charles to get the best accuracy ever, and so this point could have went to another weapon. But in any case, finally for the playing style, he went with Sai, which for the millionth time I agree with. Next is Luling Kario, and he says, for physicality I'm choosing Corona. He says he's fast yet strong, and to that I would say, sure he's fast, but when did you see him being strong? He's very short and very skinny. Yeah, I don't know, but for mentality he went with Karasu, which I totally agree with. For ego he went with Hiyori, and I agree with that. And for vision he went with Charles, which again I agree with that. Field IQ he went with Isigi, which again I agree with. Then passing and seriousness are given to Sai, and versatility is given to his brother Ren, which I kinda agree with all of them. Then for the 3 abilities, he went with Isigi's adaptability, Bachara's dribbling, and Nanas's ambidexterity. I think this is really good. I think these 3 abilities are great for a midfielder. Then for the playing style in general, he went with either Sai or Hiyori, which again I agree with completely. One random soccer kid says, for mentality he chose Ness, for field IQ Hiyori, and for vision Isigi. Okay, I agree with Hiyori and Isigi, but I totally don't agree with Ness. I mean, the guy's existence revolving around Kaiser is really hurting him mentally speaking, and so I totally don't agree. For seriousness he went with Ren, and I already explained this. Ren missing out on scoring a guaranteed goal really took his seriousness and ego's point very low. As for passing he went with Charles, which is an amazing choice. For ego he went with either Hiyori or Ness, and I would say why Ness? I think Hiyori's ego is great, but Ness? I don't know. Then as the guy we've seen before, he added his own point, which is by the way acceptable guys, you could add few points. Not a lot, just don't exaggerate it. And the point he added is actually dribbling, and he gave it to Bachara, which is I agree with completely. For the playing style in general, he went with Hiyori. As for the 3 abilities, he went with a chameleon style, adaptability, and Chigiri's speed. So here, since he did not go with any physicality, I'm assuming he went with Chigiri's. Which honestly, even though he's fast, I think versatility is the most important thing for a midfielder. And actually the 3rd ability should be dribbling, which he chose as a separate point, which works actually. However, again, I don't agree with the chameleon style and adaptability being in the same player. They kinda serve the same purpose. But with that, let's move on to the next comment, which is by Phantom Reo. Guess who is his favorite player? But in any case, for mentality he went with Hiyori, for field IQ with Sai or Charles, and I agree with both. For vision he went with Isigi, and I would say Charles is better, but Isigi is a very solid choice. For seriousness, Ren, not after the final chapters. For passing he went with Sai, and I agree with it. Then for ego he went with Isigi, and again I agree with it. And also this is the second guy consecutively not put in a physicality point. I don't know what's up with that, but in any case, for the 3 abilities, he went with the chameleon style, egocentrism, and adaptability. So I agree, but I think adaptability and the chameleon style should be mutually exclusive. However, with that, let's move on to the next comment, which is by Kisse Eins. He says for the general style he went with Sai, and I agree with that. For physicality Rio, and for mentality Sai again. And here I agree with both. He chose Hiyori for ego, and I agree with it again. For vision he went with Sai, and I agree with it, even though I think Charles is a bit better. As for field IQ he went with Sai again, and again you find me agreeing with it. Then he went with shooting, and he says, or should it be passing? And he chose Sai. Oh, I get it, this one is on my video, so he obviously had shooting. And yes, it is interchangeable with passing, and choosing Sai is a very great choice. Then for seriousness, he chose Sai again, which I agree with it. I think most of your list is Sai, which I'm not complaining, it's a great list. As for the 3 abilities, he went with Isigi's adaptability, Ryo's chameleon style, and Nagi's trapping. So again, Ryo's chameleon style and Isigi's adaptability should be mutually exclusive, and Nage's trapping really does not help a midfielder. And so overall I like it except for the 3 abilities. So let's just move on to the next comment, which is by Rambabu. Sorry again for butchering your names. For physicality he went with Ryo, and for vision he went with Sai, and I agree with both. He again added dribbling and he says that it should be a separate point, which, I mean, sure. If you think that's the case, I agree with it. And he chose Sai, which again I agree with it. Then for passing he went with Charles, an easy choice. For field IQ he went with Isigi, another easy choice. For shooting, and again this is a comment on the best striker video, and he went with Bato. And here I'm not really going to hold him accountable on this because I should have said this in a comment and pinned it, so this is on me again. As for seriousness he went with Sai, and I agree with it. Then for ego, Sai again, and I agree again. And then of course he chose Sai for mentality, and guess what? I agree with him again. As for the weapons, he went with Ryo's chameleon style and Isagi's adaptability, which as I said should be mutually exclusive. However, with this we reach the final comment, which is kind of funny. He says vision Sai, passing accuracy Charles, and creativity Sai Itoshi. I think YouTube is bugged because it's showing the 3 points but it's not giving me the option to show more. And so I'm really sorry if I did not cover your full comment. This is on YouTube really, I had nothing to do with it. However, with this, ladies and gentlemen, we reach the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and please let me know, do you like this type of interactive videos and should I do more of them? But with that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, thank you for watching.